even though at the time, English was the language that I spoke at home. My mother was learning English at the time. So we would watch English soap operas together and game shows. We were big fans of The Price is Right. And so I was speaking and reading English at their level, actually probably a little bit above their level by the time I got to the first grade. Without testing me, without even speaking to me, they put me in the ESL class because somebody looked at me and decided that that's where he belongs. And so that's an example I tell people of systemic racism, right? Because there was no malicious intent. In fact, the white people that ran the school probably thought that they were doing what was best for me, but they had these stereotypes that people that looked like me, and I did as a kid, belong in the ESL class. And it wasn't until I probably would have stayed in that class if I hadn't spoken up for myself. And the only reason I spoke up for myself is because I noticed that after lunch, the other kids got to go and play outside in the schoolyard during recess. The ESL kids had to go up to the library and take English classes. And I didn't like that. So I cursed out the teacher in English. And that's when they realized this kid might speak English. So just to give you a little bit more background, I'm a very introverted person. I'm a very quiet kid. And when people, I know that like people have seen me at races and everything, but honestly, like if there is one thing that I would love to do with all of my time is to sit somewhere in a quiet corner and just read. Because that's what I love to do. So anyway, so that was like my first taste of discrimination, and doing some skipping around. And it was also something that like I witnessed that my mother was going through because she came to America, and even though she spoke French and Cantonese, she had to go and work in a sweatshop because people didn't hire women that looked like her. So she eventually decided to go to English school and to get a degree in bookkeeping. And I remember just her going to work and the discrimination she faced for being a short Chinese woman that had spoke with an accent. People make fun of the way that she talked. People make fun of the way she looked. And meanwhile, this is a woman that speaks English, French, and Cantonese. And she's watching other people get promoted ahead of her that started after her. And I think she internalized a lot of that frustration, and she brought it home with her. And my brother and I saw a lot of that. And so I think that witnessing all of that and living through that, and plus the trauma of being the grandson of somebody that survived that kind of violence, it kind of like turned me into the kind of person that just figured out that if I didn't speak up for myself, that people would just kind of put me in the corner and then just do whatever they wanted to me. And so I became kind of the person that just spoke their mind. And part of that was as a teenager reading the autobiography of Malcolm X, and just completely, that just completely blew my mind, because that was the first time that somebody even suggested to me that history could be looked at from a different point of view other than the view that was presented in textbooks. I attended my first anti-police brutality protest at the age of 15. It wasn't on purpose. My friend and I, we were hanging out after school, and we were across the street from City Hall, and we noticed this big crowd there. And I think that they were protesting the beating of Abner Louima. He is a Haitian man that was arrested by the police and sodomized. They sodomized him with a broom handle in a police station. So that was, and it wasn't the first anti-police brutality protest that I went to. Then I went to college and confronted all kinds of racism there in a school in upstate New York, and came back to New York. Donated a kidney in 2012. And I started running. I'm not going to give you my running resume because I think that's boring when people start ticking off the number of marathons that they run in ultras. I don't know why people do that, but it is what it is. So, okay, I'm going to jump to 2020. So 2020, so people usually, they think that I'm going to start talking about like Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, which would happen in May. But I want to go before that, because I've always been the kind of person, anti-racism, anti-Blackness, confronting racism has always been one of the things that that is at the forefront of my mind. So I spent the last election year, 2016, that whole year, I ran every single NYRR race and every other race that I ran with the words Black Lives Matter written across my back. And this was after Philando Castillo. It's because I felt that like nobody was talking about this and that I wasn't, this was like my second or third year of running. And I just was not happy with the fact that like there was such a line between like politics and running, and that like that I couldn't just be myself at running events. So 2020, so COVID for me and other Asian Americans, that started to become a thing really at the end of December into January. And that's when we started hearing things. We knew about what was happening in China, but then we started hearing things about tourists avoiding Chinatown and Manhattan. And people started, when I say people, I mean Asian Americans, started hearing things from other people about COVID-19. I think February was the first time a fellow runner, Asian American woman told me, Chinese American woman told me that she was running, and she was in the path with another runner, and there was another runner next to her that was crossing, and this white woman just like sneered at them and jumped out of the path. And as it became clear that COVID was going to come to the US, I began hearing more stories from other Asian American runners. It was an ultra runner that told me in a supermarket, she was confronted by a white guy who like said really nasty things about her because she was the only one wearing a mask in that supermarket. So this was like before people started wearing masks, and this guy like yelled at her in front of everybody. And so that was like when I really began to use my social media to repost these accounts and other accounts from around the world of Asian Americans being harassed because of COVID. And one of the things I noticed was that people were coming to me and talking about it, but I didn't hear any of the running clubs. Like nobody was going to their running clubs. None of the running clubs, none of the running organizations were actually amplifying these voices, or none of them were taking a stand. I think people were more concerned about, oh no, what's going to happen to our races? Are they going to be canceled, right? And so that was frustrating. So fast forward a little bit to May, when when George Floyd happens, Breonna Taylor and whatever, and for New Yorkers, Christian Cooper, the guy who was the Black man who was bird watching in Central Park and had the white woman call the police on him, right? So that happened, and then people, Black Lives Matter and anti-Black racism became something that was discussed in running circles. And at the time, this was in May, I, along with like 19,000 other people, were running the Great Virtual Race across Tennessee. And this was a virtual race. It was 1,000K, a little bit more than 1,000K. And the reason why it drew so many runners is because the race director is a famous one. His name is Lazarus Lake. If you've ever heard of the Barclays Marathons, it's one of the toughest ultra marathons in the world since I think he started doing it in the 1980s. Only 15 people have ever finished, only about 15 people have ever finished the race. And so he's like a legend. There have been documentaries on like Amazon Prime and Netflix about his race. And so when he decided, oh, I'm going to do this virtual race, 19,000 runners came and from around the world signed up to do this race. And I was one of them. And so I finished the race at the end, like on the last day of July. And as is tradition with all other runners, I wrote a finisher post. And I talked about the things that I experienced while running the race. The last day that I ran the race, and I was doing all of my runs at like 3 o'clock in the morning. I was on Queens Boulevard. This was around 3 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning. And this driver is making a left turn. So I was standing on the other side of the street and I waited for the car to make the turn. And I'm crossing the street. And I noticed that the driver, after making a turn, stops and as I'm crossing the street, he rolls down his window and he yells at me, "You fucking faggot." And so because I'm a New Yorker from Brooklyn, I turn around and I start walking towards his car. Like, all right, well, if say it to my face. That's kind of the default thing with me. It's like, okay, you're gonna hide in your car, like, come say it to my face, right? And of course, the driver like peels off. And I wrote about that in my finisher post. I said, this happened to me earlier in the race. As I'm doing miles at 3:00 in the morning, people are yelling other things at me. I had people yell like "chink" and "ching chong wong" like right at me when I'm running. And to be clear, right, I'm not running in my usual attire. I'm not wearing leopard print or anything. I'm wearing a tank top and shorts, like clothes, right? So I wrote about that. I just wrote that, like, these are things that happened to me, and I know that there are other runners out there that have it much worse, that have to fear for their safety. And I'm just writing this to bring attention to that. And then I moved on and I wrote a lot more about audiobooks, about how I got into audiobooks, about how they got me out the door every morning, and about my favorite audiobooks that I listened to while I was running. It was a long finisher post because, it was like a 1,000K race. And included in my finisher post was one picture of me at the finish of the race. And I was wearing a singlet that said Black Lives Matter on it. So I put the post up and I go to sleep. And the next morning, it's gone. It had been deleted. And Laz emails me and he says, well, I sympathize with you and I agree with your cause 1,000%, but this is not the place for political posts. And I thought, that's interesting because I don't think that anything that I said in the post, I didn't think that anything was political. And people told me later on that after I had gone to bed, there were just an avalanche of negative racist comments left on my post. And so I went to Laz and I said, well, look, if you have a problem with people commenting on the post, right? If you didn't disagree with anything that I said in the post, and he said that he saw my post after I put it up and he left it up there in hopes that like people would be nice, right? So I said to him, well, instead of just wishing that people would be nice, why don't you just like throw the people out who are like putting up rude racist comments? Or why don't you just turn off the comments? If you don't disagree with anything in my post, right? If I haven't broken any of the rules, then why are you punishing me as if I did break the rules? And he didn't really have an answer to that, right? So anyway, but I believed him. I gave him the benefit of the doubt. I said, well, he's the race director. There's 13,000 people in this Facebook group, 19,000 people in this race. He's got a lot on his plate, right? He's an old white guy who probably doesn't know how to talk about racism. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. And I decided that I was going to do the next virtual race that he announced. It's a race around the world. It's happening right now. There are teams of 10. You run about 30,000 miles altogether, right? So I signed up the race along with a couple of PPTC members. Adam and Lisa are part of the team too. And so we signed up in August, like at the beginning of August when he announces it. And on August 30th, 2 days before the beginning of the race, on September 1st, we get an email from Laz because he notices our team name and says, we're not going to have a team named Black Lives Matter in this race. So we had signed up for this race 30 days prior to that. We had been a part of the Facebook group for the race for 30 days. Nobody had said anything. We hadn't bothered anybody. Nobody had complained about us. So this time it wasn't negative reactions from the other runners. This is Laz saying, I don't want you in that race because of this name. And then he, well, I think that Black Lives Matter does more harm than good. You can change your name or I can remove you and I'll give you a refund. And so we met and we talked about it and I decided, all right, we're going to leave your race. And so that's what we did. And then there was a lot of silence. And, eventually people from Runner's World and Outside Magazine and other podcasts started like talking about it. But I feel like it was because I started shaming people. Like, I thought that like, this is the summer, this is the fall. What else is happening in running? Like, how many articles are you going to put out there about like running during COVID? Like, how many articles are you going to write about like what people should eat? What if you're a journalist? And I know that there were so many journalists participating in the race across Tennessee. I know there were people paying attention to this. If you're a journalist, what are you writing about running, right? Why isn't this like something that you're covering? And it wasn't until I said that publicly on Facebook and in my Instagram account that people reached out to me and were like, okay, fine. And the woman who wrote the article in Runner's World, Amelia Benton, she told me that she really had to push for her editors to let her write this story. There was another writer from Canadian Running Magazine, and this makes me sad because I really like the Canadian Running Magazine. And a big part of the reason is because it's not subscription based, so you don't get those like annoying pop-ups when you try to read their articles. So a writer from there reached out and she was like, I'm a journalist, I'm a runner, and this is a Black woman. And she said, I had to like really fight my editors because they want to write this story, but they didn't want to talk to you. They only wanted to talk to Laz. And so I don't even understand like what the point is of that, of only getting one person's side of the story. They didn't end up writing the story at all, which makes me sad because I really like their magazine, but whatever. And so anyway, and just taking a step back from that controversy, this isn't like the only time. And I think that like people were accusing me of like trying to like drum up publicity and like only like doing this work because this happened to me. Like and this is something that I've talked about, but hasn't been amplified. So after George Floyd, after Beyonce, after Ahmaud Arbery, within Brooklyn Track Club, there was a lot of silence. There was one post afterwards that said that they support Black Lives Matter, but within the club, nobody was talking about it. And eventually, a few of us got really fed up with the silence, and we decided, as part of we decided to start our own chat group within Brooklyn Track Club, titled Black Lives Matter. And I decided that every week on Monday nights at 7:00, so like this time, I was going to host a chat where everybody was in the club is invited to come. There's no preordained agenda, and it's just a space for us to unpack and to talk about things, right? And a lot of people, I think, at the beginning thought that it was just going to be a place where like all the minority runners show up and like vent. And it actually ended up becoming a place where a bunch of my white teammates came, and they were like talking about how they felt and like the kind of like trying to figure out how they fit in and what being an ally and what being anti-racist is. And so we've had a lot of small, intimate conversations, and I'm very proud of the fact that we've been able to do that. I never had more than 7 people join a conversation. So people were like shocked when they came in and they only see like 3 other people there, because now you're gonna have to talk, you're gonna have to share. You can't just sit back and listen, which is what a lot of people told me afterwards. Like, I thought I was just gonna come and listen, but I ended up coming to share. And I'm proud of the fact that that we're having those conversations since around I would say the end of September. The participation has tailed off, and I'm only getting like 1 person every week, and this is in a club where there's like over 500 members, right? And so it's one of those things where I'm both optimistic and at the same time really cynical, because people are saying that this is important, but given when offered a space and a chance to talk, just to talk, so few people are taking me up on the opportunity. So I feel like I've spoken for too long. There's a lot more I can say, but I want to open the floor up for discussions and comments and thoughts.
Well, normally we ask our members to post questions in the chat box. I haven't seen any, so we're gonna, if there's anybody who wants to unmute themselves and ask questions, please do so. Otherwise.
I see a question.
Oh, I just wrote in a question.
Okay.
I kind of want to provide a little bit more context around it. Hi, Ben. Well, thank you for being here. Good to see you again. I asked a question about how do you go about seeking support and how do you determine who's safe to speak to while you're unpacking microaggressions and also racial microaggressions. I think I can only imagine how difficult this kind of work is. And you know, like sometimes it's kind of hard, and I actually didn't even realize that I needed someone to talk to about this kind of stuff. But I'm also trying to navigate safety. So any tips that you can provide on that, greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a tough question for me to answer, and it's because, and this is gonna sound terrible, but I feel like I've experienced so much racism since I was a kid that like I kind of am hardened to it. Like it doesn't bother me anymore. Like, you know, you yelling, you know, fuck you, faggot. Now it doesn't bother me. Like you like rolling down your window and call me a chink. Like I'm gonna come over to your car and like, you know, let's talk about this. Like get in my face and say it, right? So I invite confrontation, and like I don't care whether you want to hear what I want to say or whatever. Like I have to listen to you, so you're gonna listen to me, and that's my approach to it. But I understand that like not everybody like is as hardened to or has developed such a thick skin, and this was out of necessity. Like I feel like I'm a very introverted person and I'm sensitive. So I was an easy target for bullies. And so I had to figure out relatively early in life how to not be an easy target, how to like deal with this stuff so I wouldn't fall apart. So this is something I had to really learn over time. But but one of the things that I've done, and this is at work with the place that I work at, and in my track club, I created the safe space. I decided, okay, I'm going to do this, you know, and if I'm the only person here, then that's fine. But that says more about like everybody else than it says about me. I'm saying this is who I am, and this is my space. So I feel like wherever, like, I think that wherever I go, I've learned that it's important for me to feel like I belong here. Like I'm a part of this, right? I paid my membership dues just like everybody else. And if everybody else has a platform to speak, if everybody else has a space, I'm going to use the space too. And I'm going to be me. I'm not here to make you comfortable. I'm not here to like, I'm not here to, so that you can like point to me and say, look, we're diverse. Like I'm here to be me. And if that bothers you, I'm sure there are a lot of other things that bother you, but you deal with it. And, you know, and so that's how I go about it. I just feel like it's important that if the space doesn't already exist, that you just have to say, I'm creating this space and this is what we're going to do here. And for me, like the space that I created for Brooklyn Track Club, I stressed, you know, I'm not here to talk at you. I'm not even here to talk to you. So if you come to the group and you don't have anything to say, I'll sit there and be silent with you, right? So I'm okay with awkwardness because that's another staple of my life. And I think that like, you know, like that just giving people the room to say, okay, I'm uncomfortable with this. Like, yeah, so am I. Like, let's talk about it. Like, let's not avoid it then. Let's figure this out. I think just for me, it's just about creating the space. And it's tough. And another layer to this, right, is that, you know, so I get kicked out of Lazarus Race. At the same time, my wife and I are moving from New York City to Keene, New Hampshire, where we live now. The reason why we moved is because she is a professor at Antioch University, which is a university that's right here. And when she actually started teaching last year, and she was driving back and forth from New Hampshire to New York City, and I didn't like that. And I just felt that like, so my wife is half Jamaican, half African American, and there are very, very few opportunities for Black people, especially Black women, to get into academia. So we both felt like this is not an opportunity that she can pass up. So in order for her to like advance in her career, we're just gonna have to move to New Hampshire, the third whitest state in the United States, and we're gonna have to like settle down here and become part of the community. And so like I feel like that like totally changed the paradigm for me. So I'm doing all this work, right, with these with New York-based groups. And it's easy, I think, to like for people in New York to be like, well, I'm part of this conversation, we're doing the work, right? And there are clubs here that welcome us, right? I come here, right? And the running club in Keene is totally white. I look at their social media, they haven't said a single thing about Black Lives Matter, right? So like, do I want to go and join them for runs? Like they seem like nice people, right? But if I go and join them and I say, you know, we should do this work, then I feel like the response is going to be good. You do the work, right? I'm taking on more work, right? Every weekend for the past month, there's been a Trump 2020 rally outside of our apartment, right? So they've been protesting. it is protesting. It's not even a rally. It's a protest. They're angry. They're with their signs, no masks on, right? This past weekend, there was a truck brigade, they're honking their horns, right? So how am I supposed to feel about that? How's my wife supposed to feel about that, right? So we're supposed to like be becoming part of this community, right? And these people are telling us like what they are or what they think of us, right? And so how am I supposed to feel like when I go out and run at 3 o'clock in the morning, right? Last week, my wife and I ordered food, and I go downstairs to get the food. It's like 7 o'clock, so it's already dark here. I guess I've only been here for about 2.5 months, and I have been walking around town wearing a Black Lives Matter shirt, right? So I haven't talked to a lot of people, but like they've seen me, right? So I'm like outside waiting for food. And I was just wearing a blank t-shirt, a blank gray t-shirt and a mask on, waiting for the delivery person. This white guy comes from across the street and he's walking past me, and then I see him checking me out, looking me up and down. And then as he's like, when he gets about 4 or 5 feet past me, he says loud enough so I can hear, "All lives matter," right? So I look at him, and he like kind of like looks at me to see if I like heard him, right? And so I look at him, I'm like, "What?" And he like scurries away, right? So how am I supposed to feel, right? When I go running at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, right? Knowing that like people know who I am now. Like they've seen me, right? They know who I am. Even with a mask on, they know like that's the guy who wears the Black Lives Matter shirt, right? So that's why I think there's an added sense of urgency for me. Like for my wife and I, there's no community to run to. There's no group for us to run to. Like we're here, right? And there's a few other Black people here. There are a couple of people that run the Chinese restaurant and the Japanese restaurant here, but we're the only ones, right? So like, so what are we supposed to do? So that's why, there's a more of a sense of urgency now that I'm living here.
So Ben, this question comes from Linda Chan.
Yeah.
How do we continue to drive discussion about racism in the running community now that it's no longer trending?
The only thing I could say is you got to keep talking to people. You got to keep talking. You got to keep running your mouth, and you got to keep on saying it in a way and amplifying other people's voices. I mean, that's something that that I worry a lot about, whether I'm taking up too much space in any room or any conversation. And I do my best to amplify other people's voices, especially on my social media. So I'll post articles, I'll quote other people that are talking about their experiences. And I just kind of, I put my money where my mouth is. So there are people out there trying to drive the conversation, like Allison Dessair. She's been saying and doing a lot, not just this year, but for a long time now. And she has a Patreon, so I've subscribed to it, and I give her money, and I put my time and my effort into doing this. It can be very draining. It is very draining, and it's kind of warped my own relationship with running. I think being here in Keene and doing this kind of work, so the only answer that I have, unfortunately, is you have to keep on talking about it. You have to keep on like holding people to the fire and holding them accountable. And if people don't want to talk about it, then eventually you have to leave. That is a conversation that I've had with several of my teammates in Brooklyn Track Club. Like, at some point, if they're not interested in having a conversation, then I don't need to be in this space. I don't need to be here. I can go somewhere else. So that's all I have for that question.
So this question comes from Sarah. How do you find joy in the work? It's something that we've talked about in my workplace in DEIA committee. This is really emotional labor. How do you sustain it?
That's a tough one. So I study history, in college and I'm still a student of history, and I focus really on like racism, discrimination, and justice. And a lot of times my wife and other people ask me like, how can you read this stuff? Like, it's depressing. Yeah, it is, but I also feel like inspired because people fight back, like people push back, even if they know that they're gonna lose and that the odds are against them. Like they keep on fighting back and like they find ways to make their voices heard. And the way I look at it is, as long as there are people that are fighting back, that are struggling, that are pushing back against discrimination, whether it's homophobia, whether it's misogyny, whether it's racism, if people are still pushing back, right? Having dealt with this for such a long time, like people go through their whole lives like living under this system where they're like being crushed, and yet they still find it in them to fight. And I come from a privileged background. I have a law degree. My wife and I could just pick up and move during the pandemic. We're still working, right? So I feel like the least that I can do is amplify those voices. And the fact that like there are people that have a lot less than I do and are willing to like use their voices and to fight back and to sacrifice things. Like I feel like that puts the onus on me. And I guess there's there is a lot of I guess struggle, but there's a lot of also humor and happiness. Just when you find people that you can talk to, when you find people that say, yeah, you know, I'm going through this too. I get messages from people sometimes that are like, you know, like I live here and I've been a part of this community and I've never felt comfortable like being this or being that. And I'm glad that you're saying this. And I think that like hearing from those people and realizing, okay, like that this matters, right? That everybody's presence matters. I think is what keeps me going. But there are times when I just need to take a step back and decide I need to turn everything off and I need to take a break from this because it can be overwhelming.
So I'm glad you talked about amplify. Sorry, I have a baby.
You don't have to apologize for that.
About amplifying voices. It segues really nicely to Donna Newton's question. It's really important to hear these stories and for those of us in the community to amplify them. What other outlets are you using to share your stories, and how can we help you amplify and underscore that racist bullying behavior is not acceptable in our community?
So I am using both my social media accounts, my Facebook account and my Instagram account to highlight other people's voices, such as Rebuild MIR. I'm very active in terms of just resharing their things and engaging them in discussion. And this is partially one of the reasons why my teammates and I have discussed leaving Brooklyn Track Club is after one of our teammates experienced an incident where somebody made light of police brutality and profiling at a workout. And that person came to me, and I'm just a member. I'm not a captain. I'm not like, I don't have any authority in the club. So I went to the leadership in Brooklyn Track Club, and I said to them, listen, like this person came to me and said, and I didn't identify the person. I said, one of our teammates said that this happened to them at a workout. And I'm sure that they're not the only one, that other things have happened. So I think we need to do something about this. And I think part of the response to this needs to be that we need to create a forum where our teammates can anonymously report like these are the things that we experience while we're running, whether it's within the club or outside the club. Just because I think that a lot of runners, a lot of Black, Indigenous people of color, a lot of women experience things that they end up not talking about. They end up carrying. And after a while, right, and the way it plays out, right, is first, oh, I don't want to say anything because maybe I'm just too sensitive. Maybe it didn't happen the way that I perceived it happened. Maybe I'm just being too sensitive. That gets to be very heavy after a while. Like you carry that thing around with you and it begins to weigh you down. And if another thing happens to you, that's another weight. And I feel like running clubs don't do a good job of creating forums where people can say, this happened to me and it's not okay. And so I went to the leadership of Brooklyn Track Club and I said, we need to create this anonymous forum. It could be an anonymous Google form. And the reason why I feel like we need something like that is because maybe the white runners in the club don't care. Like maybe they're not coming to the conversations, but they're gonna read. They're gonna know what their Black teammates are going through. They're gonna they can do whatever they want with it, but they're not going to be able to avoid reading and listening to what their teammates are experiencing. And I haven't heard a response from to my proposal. Well, I guess that is a response, right? Silence. But I think that that's something like the entire running community needs, because right now it's kind of like waiting for individual people to come forward and speak. Like I think like all clubs, I think all of running, like we need a place where runners of color can come and anonymously say, these are our experiences. This is what happened to us and this is not okay. Because I think that like it's really important for people to hear, right? For the people that have experienced these things to hear like, that's not okay that happened to you. This is wrong. And it's also important for white runners to read like, these are what your teammates are experiencing. This is what they're not comfortable telling you because you're not comfortable reading this. And I think that it can be a place that breeds discussion, but as long as it doesn't exist, people can avoid having the discussions. And I think that that's the other critical part of it is that like, white people don't know how to talk about race. Yeah, and I'm not just talking about running. I'm talking about like wherever. Like, I look at it this way, right? Like, nobody in my family talked to me about like dating, kissing, and all that. So when I first started doing it, I was very bad at it. It was very awkward, and I was terrible at it. And it wasn't until like I had experience doing those things and relationships that I got better at it, right? So if you're not talking about race, right? If you're not discussing this, how are you individually evolving as a person, and how is the community supposed to evolve, right? If we're just like letting it like happen organically, right? Like, oh, people will like do this work on their own. No, they're not. They're not going to do it on their own, right? They're going to go train. They're going to go run a race, right? Because there are a million other things that you can do that are much more comfortable than figuring this stuff out. So that's the way I feel about that. And yes, this is a porta potty background. It's one of the underrated things that I miss about racing in person.
Anyway, I mean, the suggestion that you gave about creating a forum where people can anonymously report things is like a really great idea, and it also dovetails really nicely with I'm going to merge Jana and Lisa's questions together because they're related. But what other suggestions do you have for PPTC and also for us as individuals about what we can do to promote anti-racism within our club and also within the running community?
Yeah, I think it starts with just learning to talk about this. Just learning to talk about diversity and inclusion openly. I think that unfortunately what happens a lot of times is you'll have people that want to engage in conversation and then other people that want to shut down such conversations because they get very defensive about it. And that's natural. Like I said, like if you've never had to think about this stuff, if you've never had to participate and really examine these things, which can have very, very like strong implications for the way that you behave and the way that like and your community. That's a very, very uncomfortable truth to have to confront, right? And so the only I think what I've been trying to do is to convince people to have these conversations. So like with Brooklyn Track Club, creating a space and saying, let's get together and talk about this. I'm not going to talk to you. Like, I'm not going to talk at you. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm not even going to tell you how to feel, but I want you to come and we can talk about things. And that's all it is. That's all I've done within track club. Same thing with like Laz. Like I've like in our response to Laz, the end of the response was, we want to continue having this discussion. We want to keep the line for dialogue open. He hasn't said anything to us. He hasn't replied to us other than removing us from his race. And I think that like it's really important to get people, to prod people to have these conversations. And at the same time, it's a really, really tough thing to do, right? Because I think people like, even if you don't say to somebody you're racist, because like, if you look at the things that I write about, I am very specific. I talk about what people do. So I'll never say like, oh, so-and-so, they're racist. No, I will say they did this. And instead of labeling their behavior, I'll just say like, they did this. Laz threw us out of his race because we refused to change our team name from Black Lives Matter, right? And people will interpret that as, oh, so you're calling Laz racist. No, I said what I said. Like, my words are my words. You're bringing that to this conversation. You're bringing that defensiveness to this conversation. So it's very hard to convince people like to get over this defensiveness. And one of the things that I found myself explaining to people, having conversations about recently is like, you know, that person that like donates to charity and is very nice to you and has a dog and like loves their mother, like that person can do racist things too. Like, I don't know what you think a racist person looks like, or what a misogynist looks like, or what a homophobic person looks like. They look like very nice people. They look like normal people. And yet they do hurtful things. Like that's just the truth of this. We're all capable of doing hurtful things, and we all need to be talking about these things in order to evolve. Unfortunately, if you're defensive about evolving, then you're not going to evolve. And that's something that I have not been able to crack, is how to get past this defensiveness. The only thing that I can think of is you just keep on creating these spaces where you say to people, hey, let's come and talk.
That was my son. This question comes from Alex. So she asked, I saw on Instagram that you are promoting the Golden Ultra series because you found it to be very inclusive. Are there any other ultras and marathons that you would recommend as being particularly inclusive?
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of there are race directors that aren't as I guess notorious or as famous as Laz that have come out and are doing things. You know, Harlem Run is before COVID happened, they were getting ready to hold a 100-miler in New York City. So that, you know, is something, you know, if I was still in New York City, and even now that I'm not in New York City, that I'm paying attention to, because like, you know, I want to support them. Many of you have participated in the Great New York 100, either as a runner or a volunteer, and that's a race that Phil McCarthy is the race director of. And I think he's done a really good job of creating a space where like anybody from New York City is welcome, and people from around the world come and run his race. And it's just a really beautiful experience. And there are other race directors that have come to me and said, we completely disagree with what Laz did, like Phil did, and said publicly. There's two women, I think they're in Washington State. They have a group called Banshee Running. And they broke away from another organization that they were working with, and they have told me that they're committed to like being inclusive. And some of you might have heard of like the Yeti trail run series. The race director, Jason, he reached out to us really early on, and he told us that he totally disagreed with what Laz did, and he's supportive of us, and he invited us to come run his race. So I think that I think it's good that there are race directors out there that are speaking up. I think that creating inclusive, diverse communities is a kind of a separate thing. Not kind of a separate thing, but it's something that like needs to evolve over time, right? Because like it's one thing to say like, oh, we're diverse and we're inclusive, like, and just point to the number of to the handful of Black and Asian runners or Latino runners that you have at a race. And I think it's more than that. It's about leadership. It's about like creating voice. It's like having room for voices. So like one of the things that I've become more cognizant of, and one of the things that I ask other, I'm gonna ask people before I sign up to do another race is like, so if you're doing a trail race on land that was formerly inhabited by indigenous people, like, are you open to like presenting the runners that have signed up for your race, your customers, with that information? Like just saying, that this land, these are the people that lived here on the land before it became what it is today. And that the history of this land doesn't just start with the first Europeans that showed up and came here. I think that's a small thing to do, right? That any race director can do. You could just go and do some light research, and you can find out like, oh, this is what happened on this land. And there are people right now that are trying to push the New York Roadrunners to being more diverse and inclusive, and they have some great ideas about like what they should be doing, both internally and for the community of runners that the customers. So there are race directors. I don't have a comprehensive list off the top of my head, but I think it's important to like ask questions and to talk to other people about. And I think that it's also important, like that's why it's important to have this forum, right? So if we had an anonymous forum, we can say to people, people could use that forum to say, well, I was at this race and this is what happened to me, and this is how the organization or race director handled it. But right now, like we don't really have that, right? It doesn't exist. There's no like green book for BIPOC runners, right? So we just kind of have to like put our faith in the hands of these organizations and race directors and say, okay, we hope that you'll be welcome. We hope that you'll take care of us just like you take care of everybody else. And that can be scary.
The next question comes from Stephanie. In your appearance on Hero Makers podcast, episode 3, you spoke about compassion fatigue, and at the time you were still trying to figure that out. Since then, have you discovered some telltale signs of compassion fatigue, and how do you recognize your need to stop giving somebody the benefit of the doubt?
For me, it's about like trusting my gut. I'm 38. I've dealt with enough people now that I think that, I have a decent bullshit detector, and also being from New York City is a part of that. And so I know when I have a sense of when people are trying to blow smoke at me. And it's also, and I have to give a lot of credit to my wife, Siobhan. She's been good at like when I showed her Laz's, something that Laz said, she like looked at it and she said, oh, he doesn't care. Like, and that was that, right? And that like kind of crystallized it for me. So like, here I am like trying to have this conversation with Laz, right? And she like looked at something that she said, that he said in an interview about us. And she just told me like, yeah, he doesn't care. He really doesn't care. And so I think that when people reach that stage, it's like, okay, well, I care about this. This person doesn't care. Should I be really expending this much energy trying to engage this person? And at the same time, right? So I'm trying to be an ally. I'm trying to do anti-racist work. And if I spent all of my time fighting white people, what is that doing for BIPOC runners? What is that doing for people that look like me, right? So I feel like every hour that I spend, right, like arguing with a white person, which I try not to do, right? Somebody disagrees with me, that they disagree with me. It's fine. We're not going to solve anything on the internet. For every hour that I spend like trying to engaging with somebody, like I feel like I need to spend another hour, right? Amplifying another voice, creating a space for BIPOC runners, for women. And I try to balance it out like that, right? So like I'm pushing against anti-Blackness, and I'm also trying to help create spaces. So for the people that already need spaces, because if I'm just like arguing with people all the time, that's not helping anybody, right? If I'm just a keyboard warrior, if I'm just on social media posting all the time, that doesn't help anybody, right? So I gotta like put my money where my mouth is, right? If I can't donate time, then I can donate money. And I have to recognize that that I get tired, that it's not limitless, and it's not limitless. There is a limit to my patience, to my energy. And when I need to walk away and take care of myself, like that's just something that I need to do.
Okay, and this is going to be the last set of questions. So this comes from Alan Coe. So he has some more questions about empathy or compassion fatigue, and specifically, you know, what do you do to deal with it? And like when, you know, what do you do when you get tired of having to field these types of questions? Like, you know, what suggestions do you have? You know, how do you deal with having to carry the load of having to create change, in addition, having to deal with the mental and emotional load of facing the type of racism that you do?
I try to remind myself all the time that like, I'm not the only person doing the kind of this work. I'm not the person that's been doing this work for the longest. There are other people that are also doing the work. There are other people that are doing great things. So I do my best to amplify their voices. So sometimes people might ask me a question that somebody else has already answered, that somebody else already has a suggestion for, that somebody else has already created a platform for, and that is awesome. Because like I don't need to reinvent the wheel. If there's something there that's working, if there's something there that like needs to grow, I don't need to create my own thing. Like I can go and like say, well, you should read this person, you should follow this person, or this is the way this person answered the question. And the other thing that I've learned is that if somebody asks a question and they really, really are interested in an answer, they'll wait for it. So if I can't answer the question right then and there, I'll walk away, I'll think about it, and I'll give you a thoughtful answer later on. And I think that like, and I was just talking about this on Facebook with somebody about instant gratification. I think that there's a danger to that, right? That like we need to have the answer all the time. We need to be right at the moment, right? And we need to respond to things in the moment. No, we don't. No, like that's why I'm not on Twitter, because I have no need to engage with people that are like, that just like, just want to talk to me for 5 minutes and then move on to the next thing. Like that's, I just don't see the value in that. So when I engage with you in a discussion, if I don't have an answer for you right then and there, I'll cut back to you later. And if you can't deal with that, then I'm sorry. I just think that that's the way that things work. If you're gonna do things right, sometimes it takes time. In fact, a lot of things that I think that are happening that are right were built over time. And so I think that patience is a big part of it. And it's patience for myself too. I mean, there are a lot of things that I've said that probably that I've said it the wrong way, that I could have said more eloquently, that I should not have said, and I should have handled differently. And just recognizing that and like realizing that I also need to grow. And so, you know, I'm trying to do this work. I'm trying to support other people. And at the same time, I need room to grow and I need energy for myself to kind of reflect so that I'm not always responding to everything. And I think that's a cycle that I can easily get caught up in, that Siobhan does a really good job of pulling me out of. Just respond. Like, yeah, you don't have to respond to everything. Like, it's not always up to you. Saying the right thing isn't going to change the world. You just have to take a step back and let things be, and just kind of have the faith that like there are other people that are also doing the work and they'll step up and they'll help you and they'll take up the mantle so that we can all share this burden together.
Okay, and with that, we're going to conclude. Ben, thank you so much for coming to speak to us. It was really important to us that you came, and you know, this was these topics that you've been talking to us about is, you know, these are things that, you know, we here in PPTC have spent a lot of time thinking about and talking about, and we're trying to be more proactive and take initiative in doing these things, and talking to you has been enormously helpful to us. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your time with us.
Thank you for everybody. I feel like I've been rambling for a long time, but I'll pop my email address into the chat box, and I'm happy to talk and to listen to anybody else that wants to share. But thank you very much.
Ben, I want to thank you on behalf of the club for coming, and you'd certainly be welcome to come back again in the future. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to wrap things up for this evening's meeting. Our next meeting is Monday, December 7th at 7 p.m. Be safe, be healthy, take care of yourselves, and be supportive of each other. And we'll certainly be reporting back from leadership parts of our club in terms of how we're moving along with dealing with anti-racism and improving in terms of our work with diversity. Good night, everyone. Peace. God bless. Get home safely. Take care.